right, set?
Yes.
All right, well, good evening. Thank you guys again for joining us tonight. My name is Tony Piunno. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm an inside sales manager. So I do currently lead my own team, so I'll try and bring in some of my own experiences into the presentation and let you know how some of my model is coming into play in actual practice out in the field. My presentation is titled Leadership is an Art, partly inspired by a book I read that's entitled Leadership is an Art by Max Dupree, which I'll use in the presentation, but also because I truly feel like leadership is an art. Over the weekend, we went to SureTech Technologies, which manufactures duct tape. I'm sure maybe some of you, like Joan and Dr. Sheely, are familiar with the Kales. So John and Jack, we met with them. They had a great line on the wall that really aligned with my presentation, and it said, you know, leadership is a synthesis of theory and practice, of preparation and spontaneity, and of rehearsal and improvisation. And that's truly what I believe. I feel like it's an art form. There's no prescription for a right or wrong answer in this situation or that situation. It's about a framework, and that's what I hope to share with you tonight, is what I feel are the key components of a solid framework to navigate those gray, undefined situations that leaders face every day. And my hope for this evening is that perhaps you walk away with a nice piece of art, if you will, that you'll add to your own collection, your own leadership model, and take home with you. So it goes around in a circle, starting with setting expectations all the way to stretching yourself and others. You guys have it in front of you. I'll kind of be walking through each part, beginning with setting expectations. So you have to lay the foundation, set the blueprint for what you want your team to accomplish, what you want them to experience, how you want them to communicate. So the book I mentioned, Leadership is an Art, had this great quote where it talks about 8 essential rights that anyone should be able to experience in a company, the 4th of which was the right to understand. So essential to good understanding is that you clarify the roles and responsibilities of each member of the group. So on a baseline level, that's what setting expectations is, right? Everyone should know what their duty is. But beyond that, as a leader, you also have to set expectations around how you want people to communicate, how you want people to interact, what culture do you expect. Those are also a part of expectations, which brings me to the next point, which is establishing a healthy environment. I read a book called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. Some of you may be familiar. He also wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, among other business books. But the book, The Advantage, that I read talks about how in today's society where technology advances more rapidly than ever, it's easier and easier to replicate a product or a service, right? So the way to gain a truly sustainable competitive advantage is by creating what he talks about being organizational health, creating a healthy environment. That's how you can really create a sustainable competitive advantage. Think of the Googles and the Apples of the world, right? Everybody knows about Google's environment and the culture that they've created there. That's the idea here. So he breaks it down into smart versus healthy. So on the smart side, you have things like finance, marketing, technology. On the healthy side, you have things like minimize politics, minimize confusion, high morale, high productivity, low turnover. That's what you think about when you should think about organizational health, the healthy side of things. And so why don't more executives focus on this if it's such a competitive advantage? Well, the reason is it's difficult. He talked about in the book when he consults with companies, he brings up this idea of healthy environment, and he might get a nervous laughter over here or a sigh in the back where they think we're going down this touchy-feely, fuzzy road. But that's not the idea. It's about maximizing the performance of your people. And a great story that illustrates this point, I'm sure are we all familiar with the I Love Lucy show? All right, so
right, you are.
I use a good moisturizer. I'm older than you think. So there's a great illustration that he has in the book where he talks about the I Love Lucy show where Lucy's husband comes home, right, and he goes, "Lucy, I'm home." And he finds Lucy on the living room floor crawling around, and he goes, "What are you doing?" And she says, "Oh, I lost my earrings. I'm looking for my earrings." And he said, "You lost your earrings in the living room?" She says, "No, I lost them in the bedroom, but the light's much better out here." And that's the idea here. So why do these executives, they leave these consultation sessions, they go back to their office, and they resort to where the light's better, right? The data, the spreadsheets, the analysis. And they forget about this healthy side of things. And that's what really I want to focus on as a big part of my model, is this healthy environment. So what are the components of a healthy environment? The first component is trust. And it's not meant to be trust in the sense of, I've worked with Sarah for years, I trust that she knows what to do. It's trust in this vulnerability-based trust that the author talks about, which is an environment where people are comfortable being open and transparent with one another. You might hear comments like, I need help, or I made a mistake, or yeah, you're right, your idea is better than mine. That's what I mean by trust, vulnerability-based trust. So what are some ways that you can build trust, some practical nuts and bolts ways that the book talks about that we've actually done at my organization? Is one exercise you can do is you get your executives in a room, get your team in the room, and you go around and you say, answer these 4 questions. Where were you born? How many siblings do you have? Where do you fall in that order of children? And finally, most importantly, what was a unique challenge that you faced as a kid? And so you go around the room, everybody shares this. And just think about how powerful it is to hear the CEO say something like, I was bullied as a child because I was overweight, or I survived grave poverty. It levels the playing field, it opens those lines of communication, and you start to build what the author refers to as vulnerability-based trust. So when we did this, we saw that exact kind of result where you saw people opening up to each other. They would go up to someone on the executive team that maybe they would never approach before, but now that they've opened those lines of communication, you start to get that trust, you start to get that healthy environment. The other part that I want to talk about is the importance of healthy conflict. So the idea behind healthy conflict is, first, you have to have that foundation of trust, but then beyond that, the definition as it shows here is that ability to disagree, even passionately at times, over an important decision that might be made in the organization. It's that freedom to disagree that really gets at the heart of what I mean by healthy conflict. If you think about healthy conflict, I just want you to think about collaboration, right? You build that trust where everybody can be vulnerable, they can admit mistakes, they can admit what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and now you're able to really tackle issues. Because in the end, this idea of a healthy environment is about maximizing the performance of the group, right? We're all leading businesses here. We have to get results. So to maximize the performance, one way to do that is create this healthy environment. And so what are some techniques for creating this kind of healthy conflict that I'm talking about? The first one is called mining for conflict. So when you're in a meeting, we've all, I'm sure, had this happen before, where the meeting after the meeting takes place, right? You get out in the hallway and everybody shares their true feelings with their close colleague of what they thought. So the key idea here is, as a leader, mine for that conflict when all the key stakeholders are in the room. If you sense there's a lurking disagreement in the background, bring it to the forefront, bring it to the table, tackle it as a group, and that'll build that healthy environment that I'm speaking of. The other technique is called real-time permission. So as a leader, you're in that situation, tensions start to build, you can feel it. Just interrupt real time and give permission for that kind of conversation to take place. Say, you know, this is the kind of healthy, constructive conversation that I want to see as a group. I want to tackle the real issues. And you'll feel the tension start to alleviate. People understand that this is okay. The main objective is not to hurt anybody's feelings. It's not that kind of conflict. It's just to solve the problem, right? And the third technique is rules of engagement. So similar to setting expectations, you want to just set the rules of engagement, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, when you're talking about this idea of healthy conflict. And just to demonstrate that this is a concept that transcends a lot of business books that are out there, I read another book for this project that was called Boundaries for Leaders by Dr. Henry Cloud, where he blends, some neuroscience techniques with maximizing the potential of your people. But he says here, create the environment, the experiences, the opportunities where your top performers can attend in order to innovate and think for themselves. So innovation, we all know, is key in today's marketplace. You have to be able to innovate. And that's really the heart of this idea of a healthy environment. It's creating the right kind of collaboration, the healthy kind of collaboration where you maximize the performance of the group, you get that innovation that's key to the marketplace today. And so after you've established a healthy environment, you want to make sure you're upholding that by having healthy communication, which brings me to the next part of my model, is communication, more specifically, supportive communication. So there's a great, Scott Allen calls it supportive communication. There's some key components of that you can see on the screen here, like owned, not disowned. problem-oriented, not person-oriented, and validates, not invalidates. So the first one is something that I've really taken to heart and tried to implement at my workplace, the idea of owning a problem, right? Not disowning it. I'll give you an example. Recently had to let 2 people go from my team for performance-related issues, and I really wanted to put this into practice. I wanted to experiment. So I've set expectations with those employees along the way. They kind of know where they stood. So we got in the room with HR, myself, and the employee, and I really took ownership of the decision because ultimately it was my decision. So I'm using terms like, I made this decision, or this was my decision, instead of putting it on the organization or putting it on my boss. And once I left the room, HR really appreciated that. They said, we really appreciated how you took ownership of that. We see a lot of times managers come in and they say, oh, you know, it's the executive team again making this decision, or the organization's having problems, so we had to let you go. The idea here is that you take ownership of it because you're the leader, you're the one who's ultimately making the decision, so own it, and it just brings about more healthy communication. So after you've set the expectations, you've got the healthy environment, you're communicating the right way. Another way to communicate is through your behavior, which brings me to the idea of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is about interpreting others' emotions and their impact on you, interpreting your own emotions and your impact on others, and just being able to navigate those scenarios without that knee-jerk reaction, without losing emotional self-control. Because the thing here is, if you were to lose your emotional self-control, now you really are starting to jeopardize all the hard work you put into setting the right expectations, establishing a healthy environment. You're trying to communicate the right way. When you lose your emotional control, you lose that emotional intelligence, and you really risk destroying all that work you've put in. You destroy people's confidence in you. So that's why I've really included emotional intelligence as a key part of my model, because it has to be present in every part of the model, or else you really risk devaluing what you're trying to do. And so now that we've talked about the environment, the communication, the emotional intelligence, you can really start to build a connection. And a connection is so important. I feel like we've all been in organizations where you feel like the executive team is disconnected from the line employees, or whatever the case may be. So that's why this idea of connection is so important. In the book Boundaries for Leaders that I read, he talks about how the brain's chemistry changes with relationships in a positive way. There's a study that they did about, they put a monkey in a cage and they exposed him to loud noises and flashing lights, and they saw the stress levels in the brain go way up. They then added a second monkey to the cage, did the same thing, and saw the stress levels decrease in half. And that's the idea, right? Business is a stressful environment, but if you have that companion, you have someone that you can tackle it with, the stress levels go down, and you start to really be able to perform. So by no means am I suggesting that business people are monkeys, although my younger brother might disagree with you, as he says I wear a monkey suit to work every day, but that's not the point here. The point is, to put it in practical terms, they did the same kind of thing with financial wizards on Wall Street right around the 2008 downturn. So they didn't throw anyone in cages, but they're exposed to the same kind of stressful situations, right? The loud noises of people in the economy discarding what they're doing, the flashing lights of the media, right? They're exposed to those same kind of stressful things. So they got them in a room and started talking about the problems they were facing. What they saw was the guy on this side of the table was facing the same problems as the guy on this side, but they were trying to tackle it individually. No one was bringing it to the table and trying to tackle it as a group. And that's the key to this idea of a connection. So, you know, whether you're a monkey in a cage or a financial wizard on Wall Street or a Navy SEAL, you know, ask a Navy SEAL how important his buddy is. That's what the idea of this connection is. There's a great quote in the book that stuck with me. It says, you can't dip a plant in the dirt once a year and expect it to grow. It takes an ongoing connection to build a root system. Basically just meaning, if you want connection to be a part of your environment, you have to spend time together. So whether it's a quarterly offsite or what have you, the author suggests quarterly as a frequency. But it's not about, you know, doing trust falls or singing Kumbaya or anything like that. It's about diving into how do you work together as a group and driving towards that alignment, that relatedness that ultimately leads to results. And so once you've established the environment, you're communicating the right way, you've got that connection, that's when I really feel like you can start to inspire and motivate your team towards your vision. So ultimately it's about turning a vision into reality. and it's how do you inspire your team and motivate your team. I'll give you another example. For me personally at work, we use Salesforce.com. So I recently created some dashboards using Salesforce.com that look at different sales metrics, right, for my team. But ultimately, if I'm not able to inspire and motivate my team towards the right behaviors and towards actual results, all those dashboards are pretty pictures and colorful images, right? You have to be able to inspire and motivate them towards the results that you're looking for. And so I asked my team just straight out, what motivates you? And one of my top performers said, well, it's to get respect, money of course, but to be valued and to win. And then he's a bit of a character. He ended by saying to get women. But I don't know if that's a real motivating factor that he was serious about. But I've highlighted two here, which is respect and to be valued. I talked with Mike McCusick from Smart Shape Design, local Cleveland firm downtown. He talked about this idea that you have to remember that you're leading humans and humans want to feel valued. He said that was imperative to being able to lead is people that feel valued, feel respected. That's where you'll start to get them to be motivated to do what you're looking to do to make a plan a reality. And so just to transition here, the gentleman in the picture, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., has this inspirational quote that stuck with me where he talks about the idea of true education is intelligence plus character. And I've talked a lot about what I feel like a leader should have in terms of character. One of the vital parts of any good leadership model, in my opinion, is that student mentality, that thirst for knowledge. Which brings me to the last part, which is about stretching yourself and others. So I read this great article called 88 Assignments for Development in Place. And it talked about this idea of you have to force yourself to get uncomfortable. You have to stretch yourself. Those are the opportunities where you really start to grow and learn new things about yourself. And I've really taken that to heart, throughout the program here, tried to put myself in situations that are outside my comfort zone so I can start to learn how to navigate those difficult conversations and really grow as a person and as a leader. So not only do you want to stretch yourself, but you also want to stretch others. So the next quote I have here is an autobiography by Yvon Chouinard. I'm probably butchering the name, but he's the CEO of Patagonia. He's a big adventure sports guy. He started his company doing rock climbing. So he has this quote here where he says, just as doing risk sports can improve oneself, the same is true for a company. You have to stress them in order for them to grow. And if you create that environment where you're challenging people, you're stretching them, where they grow personally and professionally, you're going to be attracting the top talent. You're going to create a culture where people want to be there. They're going to be inspired and motivated to work for you. And ultimately, it'll maximize the performance of the company, which is the ultimate goal. So lastly, there was an article in Forbes.com that I used for my research where he said the one thing any leader should have is this characteristic of pursuit. So it's the constant pursuit of excellence, of values, of relationships, of knowledge. That same pursuit has led us to pursue our MBAs here at John Carroll. It's that same pursuit that had us in class over the holiday weekend. But it's that same pursuit that's so key to being a good leader is you constantly have to be evolving and learning. And that's why my model is in a circular shape, because as you stretch yourself, as you learn, as you grow, your expectations change, your idea of a healthy environment changes, the way you inspire and motivate gets enhanced, and then you stretch yourself again, and it goes around in a circle. Constantly measuring and reflecting, are you accomplishing what you wanted to accomplish? Are your expectations being met? And then you've got that emotional intelligence that's always got to be present so that you don't devalue the values you're conveying and you don't erode all the hard work you've put into the other components of the model. So I mentioned that value of pursuit. The next part of this session here is we're going to be doing Q&A. So I'm certainly looking forward to hearing your questions. I'm sure there's ways that my model can be enhanced. And that's certainly a value I take very seriously, is how do I learn, how do I grow? And so I'm looking forward to your questions and answers, and definitely appreciate your time tonight. Yes, sir.
Every business has competition. How do you convince your coworkers to be the best in their field, the best company, the best in their business? How do you motivate them? What if they're just only interested in coming to work every day, getting their paycheck, going home, putting their time in? How do you convince them? How do you motivate them to be the best?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think, however, if that's their attitude, then I don't think they'd have a place in my environment. So if their attitude is to punch the clock and get a paycheck, that's not what I'm looking for. So I would probably be making a change there. You know, when we met with John and Jack Hale at SureTech Technologies, he talked about this. He said, when I look at hiring people, I'm looking to hire attitudes. I'm not looking to hire expertise per se. He said you can always teach someone how to do the job, but you can't teach the right attitude. So I think to that point, it's about hiring the right people, looking for the attitudes that mesh with your culture. I don't necessarily feel like it's convincing someone that they need to be motivated. I think you need to look for motivated people, in my opinion.
The model is very internally focused. How do you interact with your customers? How do you use this model to get your people to interact with their customers?
Sure, great point. You know, I think when you look at a healthy environment, you talk about collaboration. Ultimately, the goal is to create innovation and ideas that will go out into the marketplace and be accepted by the marketplace. You know, when I think about communication and things like that, it's not only meant to be internal, but it's also meant to be external. You definitely have to bring ideas in from the outside world. I think it's a very valid point, but when I think of leadership, I think if you've created the right environment, if you've set the right expectations of what you expect from people to be high performers, if I'm on the marketing team, if I'm the CEO and I've got a marketing team, my hope is that I've set the expectations, created the right environment for them to maximize their potential, which would mean going out in the marketplace, finding the right information because they want to perform for me based on the standards that I've set. So I guess it's not a part of my model explicitly, but I do feel like it's certainly important. It's a great point, and I think if you've set the right people in your marketing department, they'll reach out in the right way to your customers.
You're in a leadership position. Who in your life was your mentor and why?
Yeah, absolutely. To get a little mushy, I guess you could say, but honestly, as cliche as it sounds, my mom has really been a great role model for me. She's currently a president of a community college in West Virginia, so she's climbed the ladder. One of the things that really inspired me about her was she's not afraid to go against the grain. So when she was in high school, she ran on the men's track team and not the women's track team. She actually came to John Carroll, got her master's here, went on to get her PhD from Kent State. But she's definitely inspired me. I look at how she interacts with people when I go to visit her at the college, and she knows everybody's name, to Ginny's point. She knows everybody's name. She's in touch with them. That's my idea of connection. Like if people feel connected to you, like there's a personal interaction there, I feel like they're more motivated to work for you and produce better results. So yeah, to answer your question, truly is my mom. Has been a great inspiration for me on how to lead.
You think a leader can wear two hats and be adaptive, walk into an organization that's already there and mold it in their liking, or are they better off starting a fresh organization where they can surround themselves and, with the people they want? Can somebody do both as effectively, I guess is my question.
That is a great point. So we were in Dr. Watts, if you're familiar with Dr. Watts' class, which is about project management, but he was talking to us one night about an article he read where they put it into this analogy of like the Army and of Navy SEALs. So he said you have your strike team that likes to go in, fix an organization. Once it's fixed, they leave. You have your maintain team, which, to your point, gets into that fixed organization. They're able to maintain it and sustain it. And so I think it's that idea of people's personalities and of that SEAL, if you're that initial task force that likes to fix it, and then you're not satisfied, you move on to another problem that you can tackle. I don't think necessarily that you can be both. If you want my honest answer, I think that you have people like Mike McCuzek, who I met, was an entrepreneur, always looking to, create and grow a business. Or you have people that are good at sustaining an environment that's already in place. They're good at maintaining. So I don't necessarily feel like you can do both effectively. I'm sure you can do both, but in the end it's going to come down to what's your natural personality Do you thrive in a situation that's you have to fix a problem, or do you thrive in a situation where you want to maintain? But it's a very, very interesting question, and I feel like you can't be both.
Thanks for not political.
Sure.
Do you think your model changes at all if you were a leader in a public versus a private organization?
I think probably the definition of performance changes a little bit. So if you think about a private organization, like, are you talking about nonprofit versus for-profit, or just private versus public?
Private versus public.
Public meaning you have shareholders?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, some of the books I read touched on that, and Leadership as an Art is one that sticks out, where he was really against that whole idea of always looking to increase a stock price or do something because you think your shareholders are going to receive it positively. So I think if you're in that environment, you are constantly trying to do some of these things, but also in the back of your mind is, how do I increase my perspective in the marketplace? How do I get the buy-in of financial analysts out there? Whereas if you're private, you have more freedom to really define what you think is success. You know, obviously the finances have to be there, you have to be profitable, but you can also do more in the sense of what environment do you want to create. Ultimately, how do results look to you? So, like Ginny, or I'm sorry, not Ginny, but one of my other classmates talked about, we met with Dan Malley from Malley's Chocolates over the weekend, and his definition of success was very different, in the sense that he said, if I can give you one piece of advice, it's don't chase the buck, just do what makes you happy. So he obviously has a very different perspective on success. For him, it's about just being happy with his family, with his friends, and living comfortably. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but I think it does change the perspective.
Yeah. Thanks.
Would it change your principles and concepts?
It shouldn't, but I think the temptation's greater if you're a public company.
Greater to do what?
To change your values and mold yourself more to what you think the public wants and what your shareholders want versus what you want to be.
But you'll have shareholders in a public company, or a private company too, so do you treat them different?
I don't think you treat them differently. I guess to rephrase, I feel like the pressure is greater if you're a public company versus a private company.
But should the values be different?
No, they should not, to your point. So it just takes a little bit more fortitude, I guess, if you're in a public company, to maintain what you feel are the right values. Gets back to integrity, I suppose. If you have the right type of integrity, you're not going to compromise regardless of the environment you're in.
So you'd be saying they're basically the same. You may have more pressure on you, but you still have to do the same thing.
Yep. Yeah, I think you have more pressure, and if you look at those, if you think about those arrows as your borders, if you will, your borders have to be stronger if you're in the private, or if you're in the public sector versus the private, because you've got more chance to penetrate.
If you have a sole proprietor in the private sector, it's a son of a bitch, and doesn't have the integrity, how do you feel about that? Is that easier or more difficult?
If the leader of your organization
is a selfish guy who has a great business, who's interested in generating profits, even more so than a guy might be in a public company. And those guys are around.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Probably more so there than there are in the environment, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. So you're asking, how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
I think you can deal with it in a couple of ways. You can try and swim upstream, if you will, if you want to attack it and try and instill your values, but that's probably a bit of a losing proposition, especially if we feel like leadership has to come from the top down. I think maybe a better strategy, just to be frank, would be to find another organization to be a part of.
That's a good answer. What you should do.
Any other questions?